So in video 3, we're back to our basic model with disposable income and consumption. And we're going to talk about things that might shift this consumption curve. And we also call this consumption curve, again, the consumption schedule. Okay. So as we see in our model, an increase in disposable income is not going to shift the consumption curve. An increase in disposable income will create a movement along the curve. So for example, if we move from this amount of disposable income to this amount of disposable income, right, we can see that our consumption goes from this point to this point. And so consumption, there's a movement along the consumption function. Okay, so there are determinants that will shift the consumption schedule. These are wealth, expectations, the real interest rate, and household debt, and also taxes. Taxes are kind of a special case, so we'll talk about them a little bit later. But basically, let's think about it this way. Let's talk about wealth first. The first thing you need to know about wealth is that wealth does not equal income. Income is like the salary you get. Wealth is the value of your real assets. So for example, house, land, and financial assets like savings, stocks, bonds, things like that. So when wealth increases, households actually increase their spending and reduce savings. That's the typical behavior, that when your wealth, for example, let's say you got your uncle's very rich and you got an inheritance, all of a sudden, then even if you make the same amount of income, you will spend more. And so in general, for the economy, we see that too, that when there's more assets in an economy, consumption increases. And what you're noticing is if consumption increases and disposable income does not change, because wealth changed, not disposable income, obviously savings will need to go down. And you can actually see that, right? You're actually seeing how savings is disappearing at this level, and it's certainly going down at this level of disposable income. Okay, if wealth decreases because people lose assets, like people have lost tons of assets in our financial meltdown in 2008, you're seeing consumption drop, which is not a good sign for the economy if we want to see recovery. But basically, consumption will drop, and you're seeing an increase in savings and a decrease in consumption. Okay, so that's wealth. Expectations. So it's basically expectation about future prices and income, mostly. So expectation of rising prices in the future will cause an increase in consumption and a decrease in savings in the present moment. So that would shift the consumption schedule upward and the savings schedule downward, right? It would just have this effect, right? Okay, but if you expect that you're, let's say, you might lose a job because of a recession, or your income is going to go down in the future, then you will save now as much as you can and consume less. So that would basically drop the consumption function. Real interest rates have a modest effect on consumption. They mainly affect products that are bought on credit. And what we mean by that, it's basically products, like cars or houses that you have to take a loan out to buy. And so when real interest rates fall, households will borrow more because it's cheap to borrow. So they'll consume more. And they will save less because it doesn't make as much sense to put your money in the bank when the interest rate is so low. When real interest rates climb, when they're higher, households borrow less, consume less, and save more because it makes more sense to keep your money in the bank. Household debt is also a factor. So when consumers, as a group, increase their debt, they can increase current consumption at each level of GDP or disposable income, because after all, it's similar to what I just said. If you can get a line of credit, if you can get debt to buy a car, for example, you'll consume the car. But if you can't get the credit to buy the car, the loan to buy the car, then you won't consume it. So debt, at least small amounts of debt, allow us to consume more. Okay. The only thing about debt is that very large amounts of debt, for example, I have a lot of student loans, and my wife does too, so we, in the long run, our consumption with large amounts of debt, in the long run, our consumption will actually drop because we need to spend some of our money to pay off our loans instead of using it on buying a couch or buying a new TV or something like that. So, you know, regular or small amounts of debt will increase consumption, but in the long run, large amount of debts will decrease consumption. So debt is kind of has kind of both effects depending on the size of the debt. Taxes are the only things that the only category that's a little different, because as you can see with all of these, the four of these, as consumption increases, savings decreases, and as consumption decreases, saving increases. Taxes are a little different, and I want to show you this slide. Income taxes, it's a special case, right? Because if income taxes rise, you have less disposable income to consume and save. And if income taxes decrease, you have more disposable income to consume and save. So in this case, a decrease in income taxes will shift consumption and savings up. And there's really no easy way for us to see this in this model. Increase in income taxes will shift consumption and savings down, because after all, an increase in income taxes means that people have less disposable income. So, you know, with taxes, they will basically both shift in the same direction, and all the other ones, consumer and savings, consumption and savings, will shift in opposite directions, depending on what happens.